You probably heard of the author and psychologist Steven Pinker. He's put out a boatload of books over the years, and one of his better known books, perhaps best known book, depending on the crowd, is The Better Angels of Our Nature, which came out in 2011, so a little while back, but not too long ago. And the main thesis of the book is basically that violence globally has declined over the last couple of centuries, or indeed over the last couple of thousand years, and that in general things are looking up. Things are going better than they used to. And Pinker is, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, an inveterate exponent of this view of the world, namely that things are just better than they used to be. And when you look at the data, the hard data, based on what he presented at least, it seems to be the case. Overall violence has gone down. Overall there's more economic prosperity. People are starving less, at least in most countries, etc., etc. There are some people every now and then that contest this, and I can't claim to be an expert on this, but if we were just to go on Pinker's data and arguments, then things do seem to be improving, and I've seen other people present this view, and there seem to be data that support this. Okay, fair enough. Now, the problem with this is not that things have improved. That's probably a good thing. It's a good thing that people's lives are ending less frequently per capita, so to speak, than they used to. It's a good thing that there is more money. It's a good thing that people can afford to buy things, especially food and shelter, compared to former times. But what bothers me, it's not just a matter of bothering me, but also a matter of poor argumentation, in my humble opinion, is when Pinker and other people who think like him or present ideas like he does come across as almost patronizing, but more to the point, come across as saying, look, guys, things are actually good. There's no need to complain because things are just better than they used to be and things are improving. There are a couple of things that are being left out of the picture when Pinker and people who present similar views argue along these lines. One of them is something called negativity bias. Something confirmed again and again and again in the psychological literature, something that Pinker is well aware of. In fact, he weaves that into his argument in the few occasions I've seen it happen, namely that people feel the impact of negative events and negative perceptions more acutely than they do positive. If something good happens to you, you feel pretty decent. If something bad happens to you, you feel terrible usually. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but generally speaking, that's how it works. Ingrained in human psychology. The other thing is an observation made by none other than the famous social scientist from back in the day, Alexis de Tocqueville, the French guy who reported both on the consequences of the French Revolution as well as the nascent United States. Tocqueville in English, I guess. And there's this thing sometimes referred to as the Tocqueville Paradox or the Tocqueville Effect. And it basically, in a nutshell, is the observation that when social conditions improve, people become less and less satisfied with standards that used to be acceptable but are no longer acceptable. Which is to say, in some sense, they get greedier and they want more and more and more. That's the Tocqueville effect. So if you have a prosperous, nice society, then it becomes a very, very bad thing if you don't have a vacuum cleaner. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a ridiculous example, but it's an example that's intentionally ridiculous because if you have a prosperous, wealthy society and you happen not to have a vacuum cleaner, that's a big deal. That's very different from living in a jungle slum where you have next to nothing, and this is sometimes referred to as the Tocqueville effect. It's related to social equality, it's related to social reforms, and in some sense, you could argue that a lot of the wokeism we can observe and the state of affairs we can observe in Western society in general is basically the Tocqueville effect taking place. Okay, but when you take these things into account, then the argumentation of Pinker and the general optimistic worldview, whilst it certainly makes sense on a macroscopic scale, doesn't really make a lot of sense at the individual level. Now, of course, collectively, individuals turn to collectives, duh, and then you look at these stats, right? And an anecdote does not a truth make. We can observe this too. However, broadly speaking, grand macro events have very little effect at the micro level, which is to say, everything could be improving in the world, right? The world be getting wealthier, healthier, There could be less and less crime. Okay. And yet you could be the hapless victim of misfortune in the sense that your father passed away from cancer, your mother got run over by a car, your brother got mugged and stabbed to death, and you were having a really, really bad time. And all the data in the world in such a scenario don't matter. It doesn't matter if things are improving because your life is still crap. I'm talking about this because oftentimes I hear things like, yeah, things are really improving. Why are you complaining so much? Just because things are improving in the bigger picture sense doesn't mean in the little picture sense, your own life, things are improving. And they make their arguments and this, that, and the third. But at the end of the day, your individual life exists not necessarily wholly independently of these other variables, but nonetheless remains independent of these greater variables. Which means that locally and at the individual level, things could really, really be crap, and no amount of argumentation or stats or reforms or historical change will make a dent in that because you still have to deal with the consequences of your own life. In addition to that, negativity bias, we have this habit of psychologically getting used to circumstances and forgetting certain things and getting over them quickly. For example, let's say you were very ill, you swore to yourself you'd take better care of yourself, yada, 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 and you have an operation and you're healthy, and then for 3 weeks, maybe even 3 months, and then maybe for 3 weeks, 3 months, maybe even a year, you take really good care of yourself, you swear a vow to the gods that you will live a different lifestyle and everything will improve. But most of the time you get used to the status quo and you forget about things. This has happened to me many times. Remember when I was put in the hospital for an inguinal hernia? That's when your intestines basically spill out over to your groin area, right? Very dangerous potentially. Could basically rupture and you could die. They operated on me, and for about 3.5 weeks, I swore a vow to the gods that everything would change and I would do things differently. Not because I'd done something wrong per se, maybe heavy deadlifting at the time contributed to it, whatever, but just the sense of I should do something. And after a while, that wore off. After the pain stopped, right? The soreness, the scarring, whatever. And that's how human beings are. So I'm not trying to invalidate the large data sets presented or pretend that things are not improving overall. From what I've looked into, things do seem to be improving overall. Although I think there are other things that are not improving. That's a separate discussion. But again, at the individual level, the micro level, things can still be quite horrible. And so when people try to counter black pill ideas and just quote-unquote negativity, it's often from that perspective that things, broadly speaking, are better, never carrying a whit for what's going on at the individual level. And I think that's important to talk about. A better big picture does not a better little picture make, as they say. Anyways, as always, thank you for tuning in. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, comment, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.